Hi guys, welcome back to my channel, and today I am putting out some of Clif High's Alta Reports. A few years ago, he released a bunch of his reports for free for anyone who wanted to download them from his website, Half Past Human, but I don't believe they're there anymore. I got these quite a few years back when he offered them to the public for free, and so I had saved them on a computer, but if you're someone like me, I don't really retain good information by reading things, but I do like listening to them, and I absorb more information, I think, by listening. And I think a lot of people are like that with so many YouTube videos and podcasts. Everyone is used to now listening to things instead of reading them. So that's why I'm putting them up on YouTube, because I couldn't really find any good audio anywhere else. So I made my own, and I thought I'd share that with you. So this is just the introduction. I will put some timestamps for when the actual reading of the Alta report takes place. I'm putting it here on YouTube because I think it's really relevant to the things that are happening right now. Even though these reports are 10 years old, they become more relevant. So I think I want to kind of help put the information out there about what was in them. And now a few years have passed, people might have forgotten what was in some of his reports. And this is just a quick intro. If you want to skip ahead, I'll always put the marker of when the actual reading of the report starts as I upload these. So enjoy, and thanks for listening.
Introduction. Predictive linguistics is the process of using computer software to aggregate vast amounts of written text from the internet by categories delineated by emotional content of the words. Predictive linguistics uses emotional qualifiers and quantifiers, expressed as numeric values, for each and all words/phrases discovered/filtered in the aggregation process. Over 80% of all the words gathered will be discarded for one or more reasons. Predictive linguistics works as no-conscious expressions are processed through the software. Rather, the contexts discussed within the report in the form of entities and linguistic structures, see below, are read up in the various intake software programs, and the emotional sums of the language found at that time are retrieved. Words that are identified within my system as descriptors are passed through the processing as well. These descriptor words, in the main, are those words and phrases that provide us with the detail sets within the larger context sets. As an example, the word prophecy may be read up by our software at a sports-oriented forum. In that case, perhaps, due to the emotional sums around the context, and the emotional values of the word itself within the lexicon, it would be put into the contextual bin within the database as a detail word. Note that the context of the use of the word in the sports forum is lost in the process and is of no use to us in these circumstances. What occurs is that the word is picked up as being atypical in its context, therefore of high potential leakage of future value. The way this works is that most sports forum language about future events would be statistically more likely to use words such as bet, as in I bet this XXX will be outcome, or I predict, or I think that XXX will happen. So it is the context plus emotional values plus rarity of use within the context that flags words for inclusion in the detail level of the database. Further, it is worth noting that most detail level words are encountered in our processing mere days before their appearance. Within the IM data primarily, and then within ST data next. But a preponderance are discovered within the IM time period. Perhaps an artifact of our processing, if so, one not explored due to lack of time, Cosmic Joke noted. Words are linked by their array values back to the lexicon using our set theory model, see below, and the language used within the interpretation, detail words accepted, derives from the lexicon and its links to the changing nature of contexts as they are represented within our model. Predictive linguistics is a field that I pioneered in 1993. The software and lexicon has been in continual change/update mode since. This is due to the constantly changing nature of language and human expression. Predictive linguistics works to predict future language about, perhaps, future events, due to the nature of humans. It is my operating assumption that all humans are psychic, though the vast majority do nothing to cultivate it as a skill, and are likely unaware of it within themselves. In spite of this, universe and human nature has it that they leak prescient information out continuously in their choice of language. My software processing collects these leaks and aggregates them against a model of a timeline, and that information is provided in this report. The ALTA report is an interpretation of the asymmetric trends that are occurring even this instant as millions of humans are typing billions of words on the internet, The trends are provided in the form of a discussion of the larger collections of data, dubbed entities, down to the smallest aspect/attribute swept up from daily discussions within that context. Within the Alta Report format, detail words are provided as noted below. Phrases and idiomatic expressions are also provided as details. In the main, geographic references are merely summed, and if deemed pertinent, the largest bag in the collection is discussed as a probable or possible location to the events being referenced within the details. In our discussions, the interpretation is provided in a nested, set theory, fuzzy logic pattern. Definitions, aspects/attributes are collections of data that are within our broader linguistic structures and are the supporting sets that provide our insight into future developments. The aspect/attribute sets can be considered as the brought along serendipitous future forecasts by way of links between words in these sets and the lexicon. Entities are the master sets at the top of our nested linguistic structures and contain all reference that center around the very broad labels that identify the entity, markets, GlobalPop, and SpaceGoatFarts, as examples. Lexicon is, at its core level, the lexicon is a digital dictionary of words in multiple languages/alphabets stripped of definitions other than such technical elements as parts of speech identifiers. The lexicon is quite large and is housed in a SQL database heavily populated with triggers and other executable code for maintenance and growth. Human language expands continuously, so the lexicon must as well. Conceptually, at the Prolog software engine processing level, the lexicon is a predicate assignment of a complex, multi-dimensional array of integers to labels, each of which is a word within the lexicon. The integers within the 8x8x10 level array structure are composed of emotional qualifiers, which are assigned numeric representations of the intensity, duration, impact, and other values of the emotional components given by humans to that word. And also contain emotional quantifiers, which are assigned numeric representations of the degree of each of the cells' level of emotional assignment. Spiders are software programs that once executed are self-directing, within programmed limits, thus are called bots, and within these constraints are allowed to make choices as to linguistic trails to explore on the internet. The job of the spiders is to search, retrieve and pre-process, part of the exclusions process that will see 90% of all returned data eliminated from consideration in our model, the linguistic bytes, 2048 words/phrases in multi-byte character format, which are aggregated into our model space when processing is complete. List of entities explored in this report. GlobalPop. The GlobalPop entity represents the linguistic sets within the data that are focused on the future of humanity, local or global. The local future focused language is aggregated into our global future language sets. This entity is independent of language, alphabet, or script form, and thus is our deepest and broadest set for emotional quantifiers and qualifiers about humanity's future. USAPop, and any other nation-state/territorial reference, all subsets of the populace of the planet, within our model space are identified by either a geospatial term such as a regional terrestrial label, e.g., AlpinePop, or a geopolitical label, e.g., CanadaPop. These are used to isolate the subset of the global populace to which the terms are being applied in the forecast. The terrestrial references are frequently used to provide a context of shared views/concerns, as in those things all mountain-dwelling people will have in common separate from other humans. Markets. The markets entity is a superset of linguistic structures covering paper debt markets of all kinds, commodity trading markets, physical swap markets, currency usage, within populace, digital currency developments, new technology and fintech. Terra. The Terra entity is the master set for all structures that relate to the planet and the physical environment of planet Earth. This master set frequently and increasingly has extensive cross-links to the SpaceGoatFarts entity. SpaceGoatFarts. This master set is where all data that fits under the context of and arrives. Our processing discovered significant amounts of data of the and over 2000 to 2003, which led to the creation of the separate entity view labeled SpaceGoatFarts. As may be expected, this set contains the references to UFOs, Area 51, breakaway civilization, and other woo-woo subjects. Data types IM equals immediacy data with forecasting effectiveness from 3 days to the end of the 3rd week. Error range is 4 weeks. ST equals shorter term data with forecasting effectiveness from the 4-week out through and inclusive the end of the 3-month, from date of interpretation. Error range equals 4 months. LT equals longer term data with forecasting effectiveness from The end of the 3-month out through and inclusive of the end of the 19-month. Error range equals 19 months. Terms employed, cross-links, links from one cell in the database and its software representation to another due to a shared linguistic structure or pattern. Linguistic structure. In my model space, a linguistic structure is a master set and all its contained subsets, also known as directly held subsets. At the very highest level, each and all entities within my model are linguistic structures, which, in their turn, are composed of many subsets of other linguistic structures. Model space allows for 256 layers of nesting of these sets and subsets, each of which can and may be a complex set of its own. Obviously, the model is derived from object-oriented programming at its highest level. Metadata layer. In model space, when a meme appears directly held in numerous sets, at the same level of support, it is labeled as a metadata layer. These layers can be thought of as a common linguistic structure that forms with differing supporting sets in the various entities. For clarity, a meme in Terra entity would not have the same supporting sets as that same meme in the GlobalPop entity, but both would be part of the larger metadata layer that the meme reveals. Model space. In the interpretation, the data sets are represented on screen in a virtual box fashion in which a 3D box is drawn and the lexicon-linked words from the latest data processing are shown within the 3D box by position and color, brightness and hue of the individual pixels. Using an algorithm of my own design and the predicate calculus of the Prolog programming language, model space is populated by these database representations in a manner that resembles scatter graphs, but at a 3-dimensional level. By toggling on or off several advanced feature S of our 3D box software, the various levels of data and cross-links and other technical elements may be displayed. MOM, model of model space. In the very first public release of information from my process, a self-referencing loop was created by internet articles about the release, and thus the next time the spiders were invoked, the process crashed on self-referential, circuitous references to my own work. As a corrective measure, MOM, models of model space, was devised as my very improvement on the process. MOM holds a copy of my interpretation as well as links to areas on the net to exclude from consideration within the predictive linguistic work. Set. Our approach involves the use of complex, fuzzy, set theory originating in the software industry's quest for intelligent machines or AI, artificial intelligence. In our approach, the fuzzy sets are based on the ability to define such concepts as near, close to, about, and like among many others which provide me the ability to assign a numeric representation as a quantifier to human emotions, which are the key element to future forecasting from predictive linguistics. Temporal echo. These are linguistic echoes across time that will reference the same, previously forecast, meme and its emotional parameters. The language manifest in both instances, that is, the temporal, meme, anchor and its echo will be related to each other, though frequently the repeating echo is larger in both scope and intensity. In some cases, the meme is completed in our predictive linguistic sense of that word by the echo phase of the meme. TM equals temporal marker. Think of this as a bookmark against which you may remember specific details of the forecast. These are chosen due to some, more or less, easily identified linguistic telltale that we expect to show up in the forecast language within media discussions. Asymmetric Linguistic Trends Analysis by Clif for halfpathuman.com Class 6, Rescue Impossible, May 2016 covering 2016 to 2045 meta-arts data and interpretation. Over the years certain patterns have emerged from within our work that we have formed into postulates of behavior about the nature of the future leaks that we harvest here for fun and amusement. One of the earlier postulates was that the more impacting an event, emotionally and or temporally, the further out, ahead, of the event would the leaks occur. It is this emotional pressure factor that drives future leaks, in my considered opinion, ahead of the events. There are differing patterns in how the leaks accumulate, and their breadth versus depth growth that now, some decades into the effort, allow for a bit better view of the process of the future leaking out of humans into the ever-present now. In the instance of the pressure component, we have observed several types over the decades, and categorized them to some small extent. Again, it is the experience of participating in the process that allows the tuning of the process as long as one is aware of one's own participation's impact on the process. Which makes sense but hurts to think upon. The pressure component is once again pushing its way into the general consciousness. Future events are leaking out at a very fast rate, and many with large levels of detail. This, in the past, has not been a good sign for calm days and pleasant nights. One framework for understanding the pressure component is the numeracy involved. Think of any situation that may occur which would impact a majority of humans on the planet emotionally. If it were a sudden event, it may have very high pressure value as it would have high emotional intensity, but may also not have any duration value in a meaningful way. Terra. The data continues to grow in support of the super hot summer sets that have been accumulating new subsets for the sharp turn from rain storms to dry spells and intense heat. Yet, as repeatedly mentioned here in the Alta Reports, the global human experience is about to be heading into an ice age, and the last of the years of oscillations between heat and cold are now fading down to only a few still ahead of us. As may be expected, the data is quite sure that as the pivot or turn into more ice age phenomena that the last heat spells will be the most intense experienced in documented human history. The data sets are describing a wilding year that will begin or has already begun and is being described as actually carrying on for several years. The wilding aspect set includes descriptors for out-of-season and out-of-place attributes for both weather and Earth-related events. Some of the details suggest that icebergs will be in odd places and in odd numbers. Further, that new glaciers will be reported in dozens of locations, yet blazing summer heat will create forest fires from hell across much of the northern hemisphere. Other aspects of the wilding weather include new wind currents that are forecast as emerging across the northern Pacific Ocean basin in mid to late summer 2016. These new currents are actually described as new patterns at a higher level of the linguistic structure. At that level, the indications are that we are fortunate and are living at the very start of a whole new climate cycle here on Terra. The data shows that new trade winds will be developing in both hemispheres that will cross both the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans. These new trade winds are shown as gaining publicity this year, if not necessarily correctly described by that awareness. There are new data sets in supporting position to the ocean's major sets, which are forecasting a noticed and measured change in ocean depth. Note, the data is not forecasting more water intruding into land from this noticed effect, but rather the opposite. The data is showing that the Earth expansion effects will be reducing the apparent ocean depth and altering shorelines, and, also, threatening the Hay canals, and reducing access to ports. Other aspect attribute sets accruing to the ocean sub-sets show that giant waves will be invading the coasts, especially those beaches where the sand is stable enough to support a slope. The detail sets are indicating that videos from around the globe will be uploaded after capturing big waves as they washed sunbathers and beach walkers bank inland, or conversely, drug them out to sea in the backwash. These big waves are showing up as being very damaging to the global tourist industry and the summer beach season. These waves are not being associated with storms, but rather with ocean floor changes, fluctuations that do not cause shears, so no tsunami force generated. These ocean floor changes are showing in the data sets as more static than dynamic, and yet will be the proximate cause for a very dynamic year of marine accidents and other ocean problems, and oceanic events. Some of the big wave videos will capture the impacts on both humans and buildings, in some areas, as the waves are forecast to invade the inland spaces. Mostly the invasion language arises from the permanent nature of the presence of the waves. In other words, the data sets are forecasting that undersea ocean floor changes are, combined with the Earth expansion effects, going to create new currents and tidal conditions such that big waves will be delivered more frequently to inhabited shorelines. These big and massive V waves are being described in the data as being independent of season, but more frequently encountered at change of seasons. These waves are described as being global with the exception of the polar regions. In some of the detail sets we see that cruise ships of Mediterranean will be bashed into quays with such force that damaged hulls will force abandonment of the sailing schedule. The guests and crews are described as being flung overboard as well as down hallways and stairs. A great many injuries are showing as resulting. These sets are also in direct supporting chain for the previously mentioned situation wherein ships had too much damage and too many casualties for individual rescue to be meaningful. The ocean's data set are showing that Earth expansion effects will be evident as ferry terminal will no longer quite reach the boats as there will be visible shifts in the local terrain. Many of the local jurisdictions will put these effects down to local currents or sedimentation or even continental drift. The forecast is that over the next few years such local currents effects will be popping up very frequently. Other blame is forecast for local currents in both weather and climate, as well as Earth changes. Unexpectedly, the data is providing local currents as a blame sponge for such effects as cliffs crumbling into the ocean and harbors, filling up with sedimentation unexpectedly, as well as estuaries broadening out and reaching back upriver as ocean shelf surfaces change. Many of the grosser effects are forecast as becoming visible in the plethora and growing of stories about Earth or weather or climate abnormal behavior. In some of the data set there are new conditions, which will form within tidal river basins such that new wave patterns will manifest that in their turn will cause widespread regional changes to the local ecosystems as everything about the local waters changes from the bottom up. Much of the undersea ocean floor changes supporting subsets have cross-links over to, or are directly held by sets within the GlobalPop entity for food production. Many of these sets are indicating that the offshore and under-ocean changes will be the direct cause for the alteration of nearby weather patterns. Most notably, such an effect is being forecast as impacting two, separated by half the planet, wine-growing regions. In one, not enough rain, and the other too much water. The weather changes as a result of the deformation, change of the subsea surfaces is indicated to affect wide regions that will extend 1,000 or more miles inland as the new weather patterns will emerge in 2016. There have been longer-term data sets for the formation of new inland seas in both North America and eastern Russia, Siberia, for a number of years. The very first instances began a set that has had continuing growth, albeit slowly, ever since. These long-lived sets have a pattern of escalating shorter-term and immediacy data sets growth before the manifestation of the set meme. We have the beginnings of such a turn now as recent processing has brought in shorter-term sets in a meaningful way to this linguistic structure for the first time. These new sets are the first to contain near-term references and contain data forecasting that rivers will become dammed by debris, both man-made and natural, such that new lakes will be reported within the next few months. In the case of Far Eastern Russia, the data sets are suggesting that the new lake may have been forming for some months already. These are described as the first of a great many seeds for the inland seas. The Terra entity has very large growth in the subsets for the oscillation of the weather systems. These new supporting sets include more data about the popcorn storms to hit the SE North America in late summer and continue into early fall. These storms are showing as being concurrent with large-scale flooding in the greater SE North America over as far as the Mississippi River Valley. These sets are suggesting that very exceptional weather patterns will be crawling over North America in counter-cyclical motion, leaving widespread flooding in very atypical times this year. These atypical and shredding storms, lots of lightning, winds, and torrential rains, brief, violent, will be a key feature in the background of the presidential theater in 2016. Many of the new subsets within the Terra entity are also supporting either directly or via cross-links, the diaspora subsets for the GlobalPop entity. There are a number of new sets for both entities that are focusing on the diaspora of these next 10 years or so. The data sets in the Terra entity are presenting this information from the planetary changes point of view, while the GlobalPop entity shows it from the viewpoint of impacts on humanity. Within the new forecasts for 2016 arising from the Terra entity, we have the oceans, heaving up precipitation, subset in which the previously forecast, and now confirmed new types and intensities of UV light will be once again the precipitating factor, pun intended, for vast amounts of water rising from the oceans and heading inland. These sets are showing that the Pacific, Atlantic, and Indian Oceans will be evaporating at rates that will be visible to those sailing on them as daytime fogs will be seen to lift from mid-ocean. Other aspect attribute sets have the oceans being so imbalanced that vast areas, the size of continents, will be covered with floating carcasses. The data sets are describing a time of great challenge emerging here on Earth that will, as the data sets are showing, become evident over the course of 2016. To those humans not totally absorbed in the daily drama of the death of the global financial system, the planetary health itself will be demanding their attention. The data sets are warning of exceptional forest fires across much of the northern hemisphere, including both Canada and Russia's Siberia. In the case of Siberia, the data sets are suggesting that geothermal causes for many of the fires will result from cracking as the planet expands its largest landmass. Other problems directly attributable to the planetary expansion are showing as coming when a large island that is inhabited will shift a bit more away from the local mainland. There are a great many candidates for this large island, including New Zealand, Britain, Sicily, Sri Lanka, and Taiwan, to name but a few. The data sets are clearly indicating that damage on a massive scale will result, though happily, there are many sets for the idea of few fatalities. The data sets are showing that aid from ships will be required for months to allow for habitation to continue due to the level of damage involved. These latter sets are arguing for the event to hit an island smaller than, say, Britain, as that would require global levels of aid, and such is not indicated, though the aid descriptors do show a long stint in the recovery process. The Terra entity, already the largest entity in model space, continues to grow with new sets indicating a very large jump in human focus being put on the planet. This is indicated to occur as a result of the many new, manifesting signs of a planetary expansion. These new signs are showing as including the previously forecast, and now appearing, new lands. These new land sets are gaining supporting values for large eruptions, and very large uplifting. This latter set has a very sizable chunk of ocean floor that will rise up to become a new continent. As may be expected, this will cause a whole lot of language and problems as the ocean currents change, and new weather patterns begin. These sets are showing that populations of ocean life will be affected as the new environment forms. These sets are also suggesting that our previously forecast land rush language will start appearing as the new continent is being discussed. There continues to be growth in the sets for excessive heat in the northern hemisphere over summer and fall, and in some areas even into winter. Note that the heat waves will be just that, waves of heat, each one described as standing for a while, then dissipating with mere hours before the next heat wave forms up. These waves of sun-induced heat are further described as being surface heating that then radiates out at night, such that many areas will not even have nighttime cooling. Further, the surface heating is described as extreme to the point of causing burns upon touching sun-heated metals. Other effects are going to show up as animals expiring of a variety of heat-induced health crisis. These will include aforementioned fish floating about over acres of water, as well as birds that will be found dead from what will basically be dehydrated, cooked internal organs. The data sets are indicating that the heat problems hitting GlobalPop will be no less severe and will also include fatalities. These problems have been described in previous Alta reports, but it is worth noting that new effects of the extreme heat are showing up as supporting sets for the hospitalizations. In these sets we have new aspect attribute sets for blindness, and burnt eyes attached to our energies from space subsets. These new sets are describing emerging heat problems as being a bit wake up to those humans still asleep, as they will be forced, daily, to adjust their worldview to the emerging new paradigm insofar as the planetary climate is concerned. Also note that in spite of all of the heat-related problems to be encountered here by GlobalPop over the rest of this year and all of next, the larger issue is still the developing ice age that results from planetary expansion. GlobalPop, following the emergence of the upheaval within the Yemen-Arabia War, the data shows that the Western officialdom, media and Western, trading-controlled markets also go into upheaval just as the wave of redemption starts hitting the hedge funds in an attempt by those conoscenti terzo livello, third-level functionaries, to run ahead of the crumbling, geopolitical, situation. The new growth in the GlobalPop entity for the spreading, like a rash, political, upheaval that will be traveling around the planet as the dollar wobble goes into extreme oscillation. Very large cross-links go over to the markets entity where there are a plethora of terminating sets that include blackouts, shutdowns, sinking of major shipping, destruction of roadways, and other language in support positions to the financial impacts of the political upheaval. The language of collapse starts to appear in larger numbers as model space is progressed past June of this year. Then the rate of growth escalates at a rate that itself accelerates as model space is moved through the year. At the base of all of the many layers of cross-links from the upheaval language, we find repeated cross-links over to the fiat currency's race to destruction and to social instability from hyperinflation. As model space is moved from late July through summer, northern hemisphere, new accretion patterns bring in aspect attribute sets for global depression, and financial system failure, and sovereign bankruptcies, and asset class of failures, collapse implosion deflation. From the perspective of the markets entity and the many cross-links over to the GlobalPop entity, this is a markets event, a deflationary wave or deflationary tsunami. However, from the GlobalPop view, it is entirely about social upheaval on a scale never before experienced in humanity. The data suggests that comparisons with Attila, and the invasion of the Huns, and the Ottoman Turk Empire, conquests and subsequent diaspora will be made, but these will be very weak indeed given the scope of the events that will shift humanity over the remainder of 2016. GlobalPop entity is filling with language for new conflicts and shifting populations, much of this within the European zone, or on NATO borders. Note that the data is also indicating that NATO just falls apart, in essence, as their funding fails and needs change and alliances shift. This last is cross-linked over to population alteration via refugee migration. As a further set of supporting values rise up in the subsets for systemic failure, the NATO-related sets show that internal disputes about roles and responsibilities will lead to open, verbal, taunting and bad behavior. Other signs of a NATO sagging to its knees before fainting away will include paper debt at monstrous levels that will be discovered along with bribery and other corrupt practices which will lead to fractionalization or splintering into self-protecting tribes fiefdoms of the NATO upper echelon control structure. The data sets are once again seeing more new data accruing to the subsets for food crisis. There are several major subsets within this larger set. First there are the just-in-time system failure subsets, then there are the deflationary, debt destruction, at producer level leading to less production, then there are the sets for bad weather climate change leading to less production, then there are the sets for Earth expansion leading to diaspora leading to less food production, then there are the sets for hyperinflation of food prices. All of these are applicable at the GlobalPop level and at all the sub-levels. Food, availability and cost, both to produce and obtain, are going to be major memes by the end of 2016. Further, these sets are filling rapidly with new, longer-term data showing that some regions of humanity will be having food availability price crises for longer than 10 years. Many of the food availability sets are also internally cross-linked over to the migration diaspora sets. These are themselves, in the main, cross-linked over to the markets entity and the Terra entity. In the Terra entity there are a number of sets going to Earth, weather shifts will cause the shift of populations. EuroPop as had been previously forecast, the refugee crisis in Europe has taken a core peoples versus the invaders tone. The data sets are suggesting that this situation will continue to harden as the refugee crisis meets the monetary crisis, from hell. As the euro degrades, the data sets are piling in on social upheaval. These sets include migrants versus police, and migrants take over Rothschild properties, and running street battles, Paris. All of these and many more sets are going to the idea of a very tense and violent summer in the Eurozone as both the social structure and the monetary system degrade into failure. The data accretion patterns for EuroPop have added several new sets since our last processing. In some of these sets we see that armed confrontations are forecast for several counties in Middle Europe as a robbery by migrants goes awry leading to a gang-style confrontation with police that is described as escalating to the point of shootouts. Other major new sets for EuroPop include large areas for collapsing, social, contract as the economy and agreements to cooperate are shattered as the euro degrades to small fraction of its purchasing power. The data sets are bringing in bank failures and cross-border runs on banks. These last sets are filling with supporting values for major crowd problems as tens of thousands of people react to rumors of open banks ATM. Data continues to accrue for the Italian bank crisis to overwhelm the EU structures at several different levels such that the first cracks appear in the Union, and Italy, followed by both Greece and Portugal, makes moves to separate from Brussels. Further issues are showing up for Central Bank and Brussels as command central in that both corruption at the EU level and failures at the civil service level are going to make front-page news for weeks as a result of a crime. It would appear from the data sets that a robbery by stealth at night will take a fortune, as well as liberate a large number of incriminating documents. The documents from the crime are showing as being made public by the criminals with something of a flourish or signature to their efforts. These documents are described as causing trouble for months. Other problems for EU officialdom include the previously forecast naked women repel migrant hordes. These sets continue to build for the aftermath of this event being very thought-provoking, as well as creating viral sensation among the Muslim world. ChinaPop. The data sets are showing that a devastating earthquake is going to be main news in China for a number of weeks over summer, Northern Hemisphere. The data is forecasting that bad engineering will be referenced as the proximate cause for the high number of fatalities as several dozen buildings are forecast to crumble on the heads of residents. This earthquake may be the one referenced in early Alta reports as being linked to CERN LHC, and that leads to Chinese officialdom making formal protests. The ChinaPop sets are growing in support of a trade crisis that will be developing from the problems that are showing as emerging in the area of bond sales. These data sets are indicating that some form of failure of the liquidity of the bond market. The data sets are further growing in support of the idea of panic talks that will be taking place between amongst the financial elites of the planet as the Chinese trade machine is indicated to grind to a halt. The idea bubbling up from the data is that a trade deal will be, or has been, struck with a bond sale component. Apparently over the spring, Northern Hemisphere, the bond sale will be a failure which will provoke an officialdom Chinese response, likely behind the scenes at that point. Then the data suggests that the response will begot a series of results that will lead to an escalation of dueling interests, which in turn goes to the create open discussion. It is the open discussion phase of the bond sale problem that creates the real problems, as the data suggests that public discussion will bring up competing claims. These sets may be suggesting that the bonds involved in the sale are triple claimed. The liquidity failures problems are cross-linked over to the market set, where we have gold fever that comes from a small country, national leadership. These sets also contain language for liquidity, contracts, that will be forced, settlements, in some markets due to contractual language. The idea coming out is that a Chinese seller of bonds will be crushed by a rush to sell, which is showing as basically bringing bonds sales to a halt. In other areas of the ChinaPop entity, we have very large levels of growth for rapacious appetites, and plum flower celebrations, dinners, all of which are supporting sets for gold. In these sets are new subsets for upwelling of motivating behavior by the government that will send the Chinese population out in search of gold. These sets have very extensive internal cross links over to the silver as money substitute for gold. Note that the silver sets within the ChinaPop entity carry very high emotional values. There are a great many subsets deep and are hugely broad within ChinaPop and show up via internal cross-links in odd nooks and crannies of the structure. So it is not surprising for me to see that as the gold fever, about to sweep ChinaPop, starts to wane due to dwindling gold on the shelf and very rapidly rising prices in early to mid-May, the silver vibration is showing as returning to ChinaPop. In these silver as money sets in ChinaPop are huge numbers of internal cross-links to all manner of capital controls avoidance language, much of which is suggesting schemes exposed by the Chinese officialdom over 2016 as they crack down on population efforts to smuggle wealth out of China. There are also sets showing that some minor-level party members, many who have annoyed some senior fellow, will be used as disposable tissues to vent popular anger at the crimes the elites allow themselves. Other areas of the ChinaPop entity are gaining supporting sets for new naval initiatives, which will be polar and focused on the Arctic. There are some sets showing that maritime and naval problems are going to be a growing nuisance over the rest of 2016 for the Chinese officialdom, and that our forecast rescue language will be making its appearance over the summer, Northern Hemisphere. New rescue language is also popping up in the ChinaPop subsets, in which the Chinese Navy is indicated to rescue a number of small boats in distress. It would appear that this is in the area of the Philippine Islands, but not certain. This event is a temporal marker for some very significant global changes in the maritime power structure. The managed economy that is ChinaPop is showing as becoming a global burden as we all move through the year. The data sets are forecasting very large economic and social changes in ChinaPop, as well as conflict, both internal to China and between China and other regional nations. The social unrest that had been forecast to travel as a wave around ChinaPop as the various economic segments attempted to transition to internally focused consumer economy continues to build support for an unquiet summer for China officialdom as the population begins its experience of global depression. These sets are forecasting that Chinese officialdom will have many overnight meetings as they try to keep their power structure intact under the rapidly unfolding global depression. The data sets are forecasting that a bright idea will occur to someone somewhere in some committee with a too long name, and it will then is described as percolating up through the channels until it becomes officially adopted policy, and then, seemingly, to the Western world, without any warning or notice. China goes to space. The China goes to space, in a huge, Chinese way, is indicated to upset the balance of space power, and the concepts that were, till that time, held in the Western military academia about future directions of the ChinaPop. USAPop language about awakening is surfacing throughout the USAPop entity. Much of this is referencing the reality of controlled politics here in USA, but a surprising amount of the new data goes to the idea of an awakening as to the dying credit markets in the economy of the USA. The data is forecasting that the student debt awakening is going to hit this summer, Northern Hemisphere. The data is indicating that a digital problem develops in the governmental systems such that payments, to whom, are lost and withheld. As a result of the impact of a student debt on the governmental systems, or the reverse, the credit system at the retail level within the USAPop is forecast to have the first spasm. This spasm is indicated to shake banks and close auto dealers, as well as cause seizures and firings at universities. Further, computer systems are indicated to be seized by agents of officialdom, which will cause no end of consternation and bowel cramping in many corner view offices. The real impact of the student debt impact on the credit system is going to be chaos, as credit cards are showing as shutting down in whole regions of the country. The data sets are suggesting that the impact will be both rolling from region to region over time, but also large enough to prompt high-level federal officialdom to spend all day lying to the public by media. There is so much new language associated with gold and USAPop. There are new data sets at levels not seen since 2007. These new levels for gold and the USAPop are at multiple-year highs, and yet are exceeded by language in the same sets in which silver dominates. The whole of the precious metals linguistic structures, in all entities, are showing very large levels of growth. In fact, there are even new sets which are indicating that new generations, younger people below 30 years old, are now shifting their attention en masse to silver and gold as money. A case can be made linguistically that it has been the introduction of Bitcoin that has reshaped the younger mind's appreciation for alternatives to fiat currencies. Just as the data for the markets entity has been forecasting that March and April of this year will be the shift in the global economic narrative and be impacting all humanity over these next few years through 2030, the data sets for the USAPop are showing that 2016 and 2017 are to be the shift years for the population as it relates to itself, the government that rules controls it, and the economic system that supports it. These 2 years are showing as the basis or foundation for the growth changes that will occur for the next 40 plus in years. In all cases in biologic reality, there is destruction at the beginning of all growth phases. Same now, and the data is predictive of a level of destruction that is being described as deep into the social order and across all levels as broad as the nation. The data sets details show huge crowds rioting in major cities as the regional problems escalate along with the degrading credit finance system. The rioting is indicated to be sporadic and to start later in a very hot summer. There are some sets that would seem to be indicating that a political rally, perhaps even a convention, will spark off a dispute, which then escalates into rioting several days later. These riots are also within aspect attribute sets which are in the direct supporting linguistic chain for both revolution and international horror. The riots themselves have many supporting sets that directly cross-link over to the markets entity, where the terminating sets include derivative failures via insurance or reinsurance core that then flow outward into sovereign bonds. The data sets are showing that the USA housing markets are going to go through one of the strangest periods ever. In these new sets, heavily cross-linked over to the markets entity and the TPTB entity, we have new sets showing that liquidity crisis is going to affect so many so abruptly that luxury properties will be abandoned and walked away from in numbers never before seen. See markets entity for more on this from that perspective. The USAPop is holding the view that the high-end real estate crisis in USA is a stepping stone into cultural shock and change as markets roll over. This is going to cause a situation of rippling effects as real estate active corporations lay off their employees. Further problems will come from the few remaining housing and commercial apartment construction jobs being shed when building ownership instantly becomes a liability for the titular corporation owners. Basically, the idea is that the companies that own rentals are not in the business for the monthly income, as that does not have cover real costs, and that when the opportunity as well as the future potential to sell is removed due to the spreading credit crisis, These corporations will first try to secure government funding, but with the political chaos that quickly dies, and then they basically start shutting down, and in the process, abandoning both employees and properties. As may be expected, the developing chaos in the real estate markets, really the federally owned mortgage market, cause a no end of horrific problems for the local and state authorities. In some areas the data suggests that taxes due to the sale or transfer of real estate are going to plummet more than half in just a few weeks. The financial chaos period indicated by the data sets to occupy much of humanity over 2016 is described in the data as having a bubble of intensity that then is slightly relieved, before there comes a swelling, continuing growing encapsulating number of years of economic pain from the financial mismanagement and overhaul. This financial chaos period is showing within the movements of model space as extending through into the mid-2020s. The intensity bubble is indicated to begin in May and last through to the end of August. Note that this intensity bubble is not showing as popping so much as exhaling, once the intensity reaches a peak just prior to mid-July, in agony. The individual subsets providing descriptors for the chaos are describing a situation within USAPop that will be both wildly divergent and widely spread, as well as down to the toes. Please note, body parts and processes references are primal archetypes in our lexicon and very telling of conditions to come. The newly accruing subsets are bringing values for crashing ATMs, bank shutdowns, as distinct from a holiday, stores close, and many other sets for civil, functioning, disruptions. This language grows as model space is progressed from early May through to September. In the USAPop subsets of the chaos period, the intensity grows over June and into early July, before reaching a peak of social pressure that is showing as being expressed as mass protests and demonstrations. Now note that the data sets are quite clear that there are very large street movements being forecast. Our problem at the moment is that the data has these street actions being long-lived and occurring over the next 4 years within USAPop. So these early sets for the size of the street actions may be overshadowed by events occurring later in this time. This is a known issue with our work and was first encountered with the forecasts of the Band 8 quake. Without regard to the disclaimer above, the street protests over the chaos of the shuttered banks and ATMs broken down, and stores without goods are showing as being massive and larger than anything seen before in the USA. A distinct offshoot effect of the mass demonstrations is showing in the data as being a realignment of the American people. The idea coming up is that the person whose shoulder is next to yours on the barricades is your brother in struggle, in spite of national, ethnic, or any other point of separation. The data is suggesting that 30 years of mainstream propaganda press work at Divide to Conquer will be undone in just a few short weeks of bloody rioting as the people of this continent will establish cohesion and reach solidarity against their criminal masters. The data sets are highlighting many instances of heroic behavior being manifest through the chaos period, with some of the more notable examples coming this summer. In some instances, we have descriptors for homemade ambulances, which will be lifesavers in transporting wounded, protesters, and police through to medical services. There are repeated sets for doctors on the side of the street protests who will, without a thought, treat the police thugs who were just moments before beating them on their heads. Other sets show that crowds will cease struggles fighting against police to allow for emergency first response vehicle to pass. In what looks to be a northern subsection of New York City, the rioters are described as rescuing the residents of a building which will be set on fire by police tear gas canisters and incendiary smoke grenades. The new processing has brought forward a number of the more powerful memes we have been following for over 10 years. Some of these memes have been shifted by a number of years, others by months, or mere weeks. We need to note that the data is pulling more, shorter-term sets forward for the memes of hyperinflation and markets in chaos. The sets for the chaos language in the new processing includes markets shut down, markets with a restricted access, and markets abandoned closed. In all cases, the data sets are referencing markets that are financial and paper or debt-based. In the instances of the restricted access language, there are subsets showing that only very elites will be allowed access to their funds. This is itself going to be a very contentious meme, as some of the near elites and higher-level functionaries will also be among the excluded, and thus will discover that they are, as with the rest of us, too common to be allowed in. This is showing as being a very sticky point for some of the near elites, a crushing ego blow such that they take it personally. Several are indicated to respond by gossip, true info, but of a spiteful nature, and innuendo and facts. This phase of the social order transformation is indicated to be relatively brief, as several of the spite-speaking tongues are indicated to be severed at the root. The data sets have detail layers indicating that judges and lobbyists and even bank managers' functionaries will be denied entrance at the door. These sets have high visibility and broad impact values, so we are likely looking at a wide meme that will be presenting a number of videos during the first few weeks of the financial crisis. Other detail sets around the restricted access to funds currencies' digital accounts is indicating that the currency event will be a surprise to most of the population. It is associated with the word holiday and late spring, northern hemisphere. However, there are also a number of sets containing language for a bank shutdown that will be called a bank holiday. So, this then gets to a real gray area. Could the data sets be referring to the next USA officialdom holiday, or is a sudden, surprising, and unexpected form of a holiday going to arrive with the out-of-nowhere announcement of a three-day weekend? The new processing also has it that the chaos in the markets brings along chaos in the society, as those elements of the financial system that touch and support the human world are going to fail. In many areas, the ATM or walking around money system is forecast as dying. Not only in an electronic sense, as the underlying networks are cut off by officialdom banksters, but also as ATM boxes are either not refilled, or carried off or destroyed in frustration when they fail to deliver the requested cash. The data is forecasting areas where the damage at a network or facilities level will be so severe as to place the return ever of those services into a state of doubt. The data is showing that very wide areas of the southeast through to the Mississippi River will be in fluttering network blackouts for months at a time. This is indicated to extend to most of the continent over these next 4 years of what Igor is calling the Great Restructuring Decade. The data sets are showing that regions of the USA will have their bank branches shuttered in the chaos and the great financial upheaval. Other areas with local or regional banks still able to function will find that their ability to do out-of-area transactions is going to deteriorate very rapidly as the crisis deepens over 2016. In these areas of the data, there are many cross-links over to the markets entity, and some of the terminating sets are within the Bitcoin subsets. The idea coming across from the USAPop view is of a population that is suddenly plunged into struggle on a daily basis to achieve tasks goals that used to be simple. Further, the datasets are showing that the national identity of the USAPop is going to shift radically as the dollar empire has its first visible death throes this summer. There are data sets showing that governmental functions will be nearly instantly stopped as the funding for those activities will vanish in a heartbeat. These sets also include language to the effect that governmental agencies and commissions, and departments at local and state as well as federal levels will be instantly chopped off the funding tree, as their heads of branch will be holding emergency meetings all the way up the chain of funding command. In the data sets are ironic descriptions of state government officialdom who will be in meetings in secret locations where they will be deciding the fates of thousands of state and local employees. These functionaries then arrive back at headquarters only to discover that a similar meeting had been taking place at a higher level and their whole department had been eliminated while they were busily eliminating someone else. Situations such as these are showing as one of the many reasons for a government structure with big holes and isolated areas that survive, many of which will do so simply cause the people going to fire them got fired before they could get around to it. Other areas within the governmental functions caught in funding disarray include new language for closure of public access points, parks, fishing, et al., with other than funding excuses. There are also subsets for military actions in wilderness regions which will cause fires and destroy property, leading to a big cover-up which will fail quickly and then lead to investigations and media frenzy. When that occurs, the data sets are suggesting to look at what is not being covered, referenced as the secret military actions gone bad in nature preserve will be theater designed to distract and disinform. A recurring meme growing in the data in a number of diverse sets within the USAPop clusters around the idea of regional energy crises. The data sets are suggesting that a spread of causes will create conditions for spreading energy crisis and leaping across the grid energy delivery crisis as USAPop goes into summer. Much of this language is focusing on a splintering of usage motivations, where the West needs heat relief, with the East needing heat, and weather chaos, rain, sleet, hail, snow, winds, are causing problems for the Southeast. The data sets are forecasting that regional energy crises will morph into national food delivery crises over much of the rest of 2016 and 2017. Further sets are going to the idea of more or less permanent versions of floating food and/or energy deprivation that will be ongoing here in the USA for the next decade. Along with the energy crisis language now accreting to the USAPop in various subsets, we have new growth and food restrictions appearing, both from supply-side issues as well as from funding and credit-side problems that will be developing. These problems are indicated to cause everything from massive food riots as the EBT card system fails, to scavenging, and many new cases of food poisoning, fatalities, and disease, as well as poaching and food wars, turf battles over food sources, that will lead to bodies floating in the water. New growth occurs in groups being in contest with the government in many different regions over many different titular nominal causes, but at their core, all the battles developing will be prompted by the dying dollar purchasing power as well as TB, to keep power. Much of the language that accrues to model space as it is progressed through summer and fall, in the USAPop subset, all contains some link or directly held value going to the subsets of hyperinflation. These many links form a matrix that overlays and ties all new growing sets within USAPop to the crumbling dollar purchasing power as the hyperinflation takes off as the officialdom decides to create digital dollars and to try to create demand for borrowing. Many of the sets include state government debt failures and state government bond failures and state government pension plan failures, all of which are in supporting positions to the crashing social order. These pension plan crashes are also cross-linked over to other USAPop sets that go to the idea of riots and defaults. The defaults, at least until later in 2016, have the higher level of emotional tone sums. The data sets are showing that wide and wild swings in the prices and availability of all kinds of formerly plentiful goods will be headline news for much of the latter half of 2016. The wild price swings will be on everything from energy to foods and will be violent enough to induce local rioting in many communities across the USAPop. In some of the detail sets we see that vital, household, goods will have price swings, due to availability, of 5,000% over the course of mere months. The data sets are forecasting that the summer, Northern Hemisphere, will be the summer of lists in which continuing lists, of bankruptcies, of record-breaking numbers will dominate all of the media. These lists include new weather records breaking, which cause food crisis, cities going broke, states and counties parishes going broke, national pension schemes going broke, and on and on and on. The summer of lists is going to be a very large, wide, temporal marker for many decades of yet-to-be-born economists. These lists will also include huge numbers of central banks' firsts, and/or mosts. These new record-breaking central bank events are all tied into their hyperinflationary push, then the push against hyperinflation. It is this latter set which is more effective from 2018 onward that appears to be the driving force of the rest of the next 10 years. In other words, a brief, two-year stint of hyperinflation will be used, so says the data, as the excuse by TPTB to introduce monetary reform as a global issue. Thereafter the focus of the data growth is humans versus inflation as the new global monetary system is promulgated. The hyperinflationary years are showing in model space as being the worst of the crushing years of the global depression excepting if one lives in North America. The death of the dollar in its purchasing power by the cure of hyperinflation is showing as reducing the USAPop to a shell of its peak robust self. The data sets are showing that the depression will be marked by many of the younger generations as beginning in 2016. Without regard for the accuracy of the statement, the emotional tone of the nation will change from 2016 onward in a palpable way, which latter-day historians as well as many who are currently faced with living through it will place at the feet of the Great Global Depression. The data sets are showing that crises in China will precipitate a depeg as well as a credit rating strip and a ratings crisis, which then spread throughout the financial world. It is at this point, sometime past July 2016, that the gold in the vaults issue rises, both in the USA and in China. During this period, the data is forecasting that all media will be reporting how bad and worse things have become in recent months. During the show me yours and I'll show you mine phase, the data shows that the numbers around gold and silver go truly ballistic. The data is forecasting that the rate of increase of the price of gold itself will be increasing at high single digits. Stated another way, the daily rate of growth will be escalating near 9%. This gold rise rate speed up will be a huge catalyst for lines in the street to buy physical gold silver. The desperation level seems to be tied directly to the rising rate of gold value, in dollars. The words in the media will include spectacular, and parabolic, and rocket to the moon, and peak silver, and peak gold, and international currency instability, and on and on and on. Starting back in the near term, we set model space to early June 2016 and move it slowly through the year. In so doing, the perspective of things getting out of control of TPTB rises with each progressive move toward the end of the year. The data sets accrue in larger and larger numbers the further along in the year we move, and these sets are each growing in emotional sum values as well. The effect of watching model space at this level is to create the impression of a big beast dying as the core is slowly consumed by the increasing chaos from the edges. The data sets are describing the descent of the daily life of the average Joe Josephine into a form of walking, mentally, wounded state by the end of the year. The whole of the accretion so far for 2016 shows a growing slide into undifferentiated dysfunction in which the daily life, supporting, infrastructure goes from its current marginally functional condition to fully fucked up by the end of the year. And that is but the near-term lower low insofar as longer-term projections from the data are concerned. The LT sets would have 2017 be a nasty continuation of the rottenness of 2016. The data sets are describing a big wump that will be the crash period of late spring and throughout summer. During this period the giant layoffs will begin, as will the growing presence on the street of the recently unemployed. These sets are suggesting that more and more young people are without work, as the weather gets hot and the systems fail. This is the gathering state of milling about that is then magnified as many of the parents are also fired, and then things, on the streets, get worse. The data sets have some details for some areas suggesting that a few of the sparks for this summer's season of contention will include an elderly woman crushed down, and water restrictions, by police on street activities, and inner-city stores shut down, credit freeze, and hit and run by officialdom vehicle, and on and on and on. But at the core of all of the upcoming social distress is the destroyed money. The data sets are suggesting that many new national scandals relating to money in some form will emerge over 2016 and briefly occupy the public attention span as the major crises unfold. Some of these scandals will include gold, not there, in which a national USA pension plan which had thousands of clients who thought that they had gold in their 401k and other self-directed pension plans. These sets are suggesting that some of the officials at the national offices of the pension plan will survive to regret their participation in the fraud scheme as clients are forecast to assault the offices, and in the resulting confrontation fight melee, several of the financial firm employees will not survive. This is but one of many such scandals. In other detail sets we have descriptors of lunch meetings at prominent restaurants at note. Southern California most likely, in which movie people will be beaten up, roughed up, dirted up as their lunch meetings were with scam artists, swindlers who will happen to be seen by some of their victims, and the resulting bash about will catch movie people in the video of the incident. These sets would seem to suggest that a major celebrity will be involved and that the reports of the incident will make national news for a brief few days. Other instances of scandals emerging are showing as including relabeled foods that will cause huge giant problems with hospitals across a wide region of the South. Other issues will include stolen siphoned funds that had been converted to money and something of a national obsession for a few days. As a chase ensues, felons vanish along with money, and speculative chatter goes crazy until resolution a few days later on usually empty roadway in a lonely desert. The longer-term data sets have new growth in areas that are linking BrazilPop and USAPop. In much the same way that early America was temporally linked to the revolution in France, we have new sets that are binding the activities of North and South America over these next few years as the decade of struggle becomes apparent to all. These links are suggesting that major population movements are underway and will continue through the 2030s with some force. While the data sets have emotional sum values indicating the usual rise and fall seen within all human activities, we have a dominating floor of emotional tone value to provide support for the idea of social cycles completing changing in which the cycle is on the order of 5,000 years. In other words, major change growing under your feet at a level that you are not able to imagine as it is larger than generational in size. The longer-term value sets are bringing in phrases such as before the revolution, and in the old days, and in days past, and before the crack-up, and before the break-up, and many others, all going to the idea of past times when the dollar was dominant. These phrases are showing as coming into general circulation over the next 20 years as the USAPop progresses through its decade of struggles to redefine itself. Much of the redefinition effort is showing as being reconciliation with the crimes of the past, leadership, done in the name of the people. Also, it needs to be noted that the Saudi officialdom is soon going to be shaking in their robes as their luck runs out and the bribery ceases to hold. When this occurs, the House of Saud will also be under severe stress from its Yemen adventure, as well as internal financial chaos. The situation there, in Arabia, is indicated to get very intense as the Americans discover pertinent facts. The data sets are forecasting very challenging times indeed for the next decade and a half. The worst of things are forecast to include mass migrations as nuclear infrastructure goes bad rotten. The best of things are forecast to include renaissance and reinvigoration of the populace. Both of these memes are internally cross-linked to each other as the data goes to the idea that nuclear disaster forces creative invention at levels never before achieved, all the while huge parts of the population go walkabout. Also, please note that the diaspora sub-sets continue to fill with language echoing that of the 1930s Dust Bowl migrations. There are sets going to the Renaissance in American manufacturing as the new robotics reaches the breakout into the public level. What is being forecast here goes to shock and being overwhelmed as the robotics concept is indicated to be torn apart by American invention. Within the larger sets in this segment of the Renaissance, we also have the subsets for the wireless telepathy and other inventions that are going to severely stress the control infrastructure of TPTB. The USAPop entity gains new emotional sums in the areas of both anger and resentment as model space is moved forward over summer. Not only from the economic malaise and the political games being played by the party structure, but now, also showing as a cause is the degradation and dysfunction of the electrical grid. As the grid begins having regional problems, the data shows that anger will manifest in dozens of ways as the population, in the affected areas, are forced to react to blackout conditions just when they need the electrical support. A number of subsets are painting a picture of the new monetary system that will be rising as the dollar infrastructure dies here in USAPop. The data currently is showing an evolving system that is not top-down and delivered, but rather is born of necessity and is self-organizing and self-limiting. Much of this language goes to increasingly sophisticated forms of barter, but also cryptocurrencies are prominent in the descriptor sets as being a mobile alternative to daily degradation of the dollar. Many other sets are related to the dollar degradation. These include cruise ship labor disputes with passengers held hostage, hospitals closed due to lack of supplies, public events cancelled due to lack of funds for police security cleanup. Note that this last is going to anger a whole lot of people who will decide to do it anyway, that in turn leads to some very bad outcomes. BritainPop. The data sets are showing that BritainPop is going to be sad and drunk as a result of yet another crushing defeat to the population at the metaphoric hands of the controlling elites. The data is showing that migration and extremist behavior are amongst the top motivators for the British pop in their voting, and further the data suggests that there shall be ignored very shortly after the political sham of the vote has cooled. IsraelPop. Recent data sets are showing that the declining living standard amongst IsraelPop will produce economic schisms as various fronts, political interests, sensing a developing power vacuum, will be pressing their case. These data sets are filling with new supporting sets for a governmental push to produce robots, general purpose, that will be the big emotional hook for the corporate base. The problem is going to be that just as the effort to boost local economy via big debt-funded investment in robotics begins, the data is forecasting that a scandal will be developing over robots gone bad. In the instances cross-linked, the data suggests that there will have been fatalities and corporate cover-ups. BrazilPop, as had been forecast in way long ago. Alta Reports, the revolution meme has surfaced in Brazil. New growth shows this revolution meme spreading across the continent from east to west and starting in the middle, spreading first north, then later to the south. Both Uruguay and Paraguay seem relatively immune to the upcoming problems or upheaval. Current growth in the BrazilPop sets include the idea that international problems are going to erupt along with BrazilPop. The idea coming out is that all manner of international sporting events, not only the Olympic Games, are going to be shut out of production facilities by local social action, which will emerge from a riot gone wild that will become a successful model for local popular actions. The data sets are forming support for an occupation zone, which will really be a no-go officialdom zone due to the many local committees, forming new local governments in a de facto fashion. The idea is of a Brazil, from the view of officialdom, being cratered as various local communities begin realizing they are isolated and not likely to receive federal government assistance. The data further supports the sets that have language indicating that to speak is to secede, or public outcry over incompetence and corruption. Other sets related to the revolution sub-set within BrazilPop include starving, hunger strikes, related to prisons, and ports shut down, as credit freezes due to international jitters over local popular actions. The local popular actions are extensively cross-linked over to the alternative media and what is called woo-woo, or the officially denied, and/or disappeared information. The data further suggests that due to economic lies the local population is forced to investigate what happened to them, their jobs, etc. This is shown as creating conditions for mass awakening. This is going to be hastened by the wave of bankruptcies globally that creates whistleblowers in large numbers. Markets. The big one is showing up in the markets entity as the new data is accruing for the largest paper debt crash ever. The big one crash language is piling up new aspect attribute sets for equity plunge and stocks plummet, and debt defaults, and carry of forex, trade failures, and price fluctuations in bonds. The data is growing in the sets for a stock equity market movement that is described as bringing tears and squeezing the V-bowels. The data is filling with language around the idea of a record pace, downward, and elevator stomach heaves. Other sets show that corporations will be scrambling to recover mere pennies as liquidity fails. The language around liquidity continues to gain supporting sets for supply chain, credit failure, and base money supply vaporization, and withering arteries lead to shrinking veins. Other new sets include gateways, thin and fat, over anxious, credit pushers, and no credit demand. The data further shows that the collapsing credit demand markets as well as the disappearing base money supply will produce a maturing situation over summer and through fall, northern hemisphere, in which the just-in-time delivery system is described as falling apart, as though fasteners removed. These and many other new sets are describing a world gone wonky according to the officialdom view of things. In this world gone wonky viewpoint, the officialdom pronouncements are supposed to be the key element in determining how things work, not reality. The impact of reality is forecast as shoving a stick up the arse of officialdom, as the markets and liquidity failures will prompt an officialdom response that will totally screw up the situation. There are several new sets going to the idea that the Fed response to the monetary crisis is going to make traders vomit and feel both unwell and in a state of unreality. The unreal feeling of the markets is showing as being a factor in and of itself, as disbelief becomes both the feeling and the word heard in both mainstream propaganda and alternative press anytime the markets are being discussed. Other words to be heard relative to the markets over the rest of April and through May-June are tilted, skewed, and squirrely. Other images coming up are comparisons to caged rats eating each other's tails, and buckets of pissed-off octopi. The data sets are seemingly indicating that the disbelief of officialdom numbers about anything will be reaching such large proportions of the population that a revolutionary awakening is being forecast as on the horizon. In sailing terms, this phrase means that something, once observed in the distance, will continue to grow daily in your vision. The data sets are showing that the hyperinflation that is forecast to begin in mid to late summer, northern hemisphere, will be described by the captive press, aka mainstream propaganda press, as being but an episode. However, the impacts are forecast as hitting working population to such an extent that the population will feel blooded by the cutting of the money. These sets are further supported by new subsets that are accruing to the older supporting sets of food crisis and failures of the delivery system that will be episodically floating about the USA and many parts of Canada. The data sets are suggesting that the word great and giant and monstrous will be some of the many words in the same vein that are forecast to be pouring out of the propaganda press over these next few months. These words are going to be applied to bubbles, as well as waves of selling and days of the down numbers. The data sets are pointing toward the April fall-off of the edge of monetizing of assets that will be preceding summer, northern hemisphere, hyperinflation. Other new sets for popular culture words phrases include a forecast for all-in and actual costs as the price suppression that has been occurring as a result of central planning accelerates its peeling back of the layers of rigging. The data sets are suggesting that markets of all kinds will be entering a chaos period that will dominate the summer broadcasts within the Western media. The data is suggesting that by late in summer, Northern Hemisphere, the outbreak of hostilities, as well as the environmental destruction that is starting to emerge from them by then, recent sinking of some form of transport ships will be the named cause for the raging and terrifying emergence of the global currency crisis. The data accretion patterns are showing that the breakdown of the mainstream propaganda press will be accompanying the waterfall crashes of the global fiat currencies. The data is showing that bizarre schemes will be paraded by government shills and speakers in front of the populations as they officialdom tries to get something to fly, be accepted. The data accretion patterns are arguing for a derivative hot potato to emerge in late May or early June that will set fire to banks. Some 30+% of the new fire to banks language has both gold and silver within the new growth for the sets. These new silver and gold references are themselves descriptor sets for subsets within this lexical structure. The gold and silver subsets within this area are filling with money and interest rates as primary and secondary supporting aspects. The attribute sets within these aspects are focusing on competition between banks to acquire and store these forms of real money. Further, the data sets are also growing with interest rates as a major contributing subset for the derivatives hot potato, with a focus in these sets on a debacle that will begin with or in Turkey that will damage a key element that is a basis for a derivative chain. The real problem being highlighted is that a series of between bank sales of derivatives will be discovered to be a tightly bound chain that will have the holding link break just as the next leg of the currency competition begins its biting to the bone phase. The new data for this report brings in new sets for hyperinflation that within their supporting sets they have new sets showing a forced revaluation of fee gold. Note, this may be just discussion at this stage and not action. There are some hints that this is a thing meme being driven by TPTB. There are a number of large, new crosslinks forming that terminate within the TPTB entity where the terminating sets are filled with new language for new limits and new understanding of gold in monetary policy, and no constraints bounds on the currency devaluations. Other sets are directly going to ideology and fundamental belief, and others in a similar vein that go to the religious nature of the monetary system, i.e., belief in ephemeral abstractions, mental images, that will be rearing up in the discussions about gold, specifically. Further, these sets contain subsets and other directly held values that go to central banks being in the position of discussing in public of a forced revaluation of gold. These sets are also getting supporting values from a small country which is in desperate straits within the financial system. Apparently this small nation will be in possession of some serious gold reserves, maybe a new, large mine discovered. Note, data shows that the discovery has already occurred, but is being kept close to very few, interested, involved, and controlling hands. But note that the discovery may be not a storage of gold, but maybe rather a discovery of how to capitalize on a forced gold price revaluation. Recent processing in the sets above adds new sets that may be hinting that Bangladesh may be the small nation who upsets global banking. These sets are suggesting that revenge is a contributing motivator. The data sets are forecasting that gold as money will be launched into global debate by the actions of the small nation. This discussion alone is showing as being a policy-crushing event for the central banksters and the propaganda media. The data further gains new supporting subsets for a gold standard. Further, the data is supporting that smugglers and others, criminals in official demise, will find it in their interest to support the small nation through a hidden channel to get gold to them. These sets are very high in emotional values and almost obscured by the number of cross-links over to the TPTB entity and USAPop entity. Much of the gold supporting sets are going to the idea of dollar degradation being a major propellant for the dollar price of gold. These sets are clearly showing that new all-time highs are coming for gold, and further that silver will get there first. These sets are showing that an initial pop of price action is going to be causing the oppressors of the precious metals to have loose bowels, as the media and public are showing as catching gold and silver fever. This is against a background of developing political fracturing and massive economic failure. These sets contain data for crashing housing markets, as well as deflationary debt destruction, and other sets in the same vein going to the idea that once support from Fed dies, so do all the debt as asset bubbles. And further, the data shows that they do not merely deflate, but rather rupture and explode in a violent manner. Housing within the data accumulated over these last several months is forming an entirely new narrative about the future of both housing and construction across the globe. The market's entity component of the housing shift is showing that a condition of equity, but no cash is going to assail the real estate markets globally as the Western, dollar-dominated, financial system come further unglued over this summer and into fall. The data is showing that in early to mid-June, there will be something like a flood of sellers as the owners perceive their equity at risk of vanishing. The data shows a narrative that runs such as this: credit markets seize up, governmental agencies, USA, will fail to deliver the cash and guarantees needed for the financing of house sales. This will be occurring because of the credit market freeze, which will induce a run to cash globally that in its turn will force many as sellers to be unable to market their property due to the sudden freeze, lack of liquidity, in the financing mechanisms for real estate. On the market's entity view of this situation, it develops against a background of increasing political instability in USA and repeated and escalating in failures of USA officialdom to pay bills. This in turn brings out foreign fears and avoidance, supported by disease, of the dollar-denominated debts held as assets. The market's entity view of the new narrative for global housing and its related cousin, construction, are showing that a seizure in both areas occurs as a result of a tightening credit system. As the data shows, the dollar base, real money, not digital, debt-based liabilities labeled as assets, shrinks rapidly. This causes deals to sour for first larger sales, more on this below. High-end real estate is showing as hurting much more than any property being sold in the middle to lower price brackets. These higher-end properties are filling sub-sets with new data supporting the idea of failed sales in your local market, gain press and induce price-lowering frenzy as the motivated sellers become freaked out and begin slashing their prices. This then freaks out those sellers who, up to that point, were thinking that the real estate markets in their local areas were still normal. The problem they face is made worse by their sudden awakening to all the system crumbling, and their also sudden awakening to their wealth being held hostage as equity. Note that the data is indicating that the equity is all based on false numbers and the assumed ability of someone else to obtain financing and cash them out. The data shows that this assumption is laid out as false by early July in most of the major markets in the Western world. There are new growth areas in the abandonment of high-end property, as the high-pay workers get trashed by the crumbling system and discover that they are not rich but rather are debt-bound. Many of these properties will be abandoned when the equity starts melting away in the degrading real estate markets. Then, curiously, there are several sets indicating that a strange development will occur in which, likely in USA, government agencies will be investigating the sudden, rectifying, downward turn of their real estate markets as manipulation. This is indicated to form a bit of comedy for those who are aware as these government agencies start attacking the issue of manipulation only to run into banks. This will create a whistleblower who is indicated to change the game of markets corruption. Apparently, this individual is going to bring down the, at that time, top 2 bank CEOs. Again, curiously, this whistleblower event is also indicated to be used in far future as a temporal marker for the failure of our current monetary, financial system. The data sets from this point are showing that complex deals will be coming apart in a flood over 2016 such that 2017 is also filling up with temporal markers, including the total collapse of the global market for mortgages. Many of growth areas of the market's entity are fundamentally pointing toward a complexity, pressure, systemic failure in which the combining factors of failure at small levels, mainly within officialdom, will lead to a situation of the broken teeth will be blocking the movement of the gears. The data is indicating that the failures at small levels have already accumulated to the point of being system-clogging debris. The complexity component of the upcoming failure blockage needs to be recognized as the contributing factor which pushes the system over the edge. The complexity of the interconnected systems that are the mechanisms of government becomes so wound up together as to cease to function. Some of the details include tourists being held hostage by park workers, and boats being denied landings due to computer failure, which in its turn induces port workers to protest lack of work, which then causes the police to arrest the port workers, and in the melee, also many of the port authorities, management, also end up in jail. This is likely going to be in the USA, but the immediate impact will be to cause international shipping ramifications and a rapidly unfolding trade war. Much of the complexity blocking story within the data sets goes to the idea of policies being implemented which are instantly in conflict with reality and sanity, and also, frequently, other insane governmental policies which exists as no policy is ever reviewed nor questioned prior to implementation. This is described within the data as an offshoot of the complexity problem also affecting policy creators and implementing personnel, aka police. Some of the complexity set has brought in new subsets to the effect that the officialdom will find itself in daily conflicts between government agencies and departments with itself. A number of new sets are bringing in language for the markets entity that are in support of a very primary emotional descriptor of distortions. These new sets are adding more weight to the wobble of the dollar, pumping the pendulum so to speak, as the data brings in new sets forecasting regional, within USA, separations at the government level due to dollar purchasing power failure and regional source dollar generation. In other language, the description of the USA governmental infrastructure during a period of officialdom-induced meltdown is going to resemble feuding warlords and gang turf battles. These intergovernmental battles are showing as being entirely about retaining funding and power centers. As the government is shown fighting it out amongst themselves for crumbling funding, the markets entity is painting a picture of chaos and disruption in the flow of finance and the trading of goods. The data sets continue to accrue for a very bad summer and fall, leading to a terrible winter of financial death here in the markets realm. These sets are forecasting that the financial black plague will be emerging in early October as record numbers of corporations will be going out of business and or filing for bankruptcy. As model space is progressed through summer and into fall, the Eastern storm outlook forecast for both weather and markets is very intense. The movement of model space during the months of September, October, and November have a very large bulge in the intake of new values for stormy, frightful, scary conditions affecting what remains of the markets. The new detail sets accruing for this period show banks' regional failures that will shutter thousands of branches, and large banks that are teetering, with daily news stories about how fragile they are becoming, and grocery chains being kept open by officialdom dictate. The data sets are showing that bond markets are the leading edge of the crash language, and further that central banks are going to be pushed down when the bond market first lifts up, then rolls over. The lifting up language may be referring to interest rates, and if so, these sets are predictive of a very sharp increase that can be described as teeth sinking deep down to the bone. The real estate markets at a global level, but with specific focus on the USA, is showing that as the heat picks up in summer, northern hemisphere, the housing markets will run into the reality of the ability to sell. These sets are going to the idea of inventory building to the point of a flooded market, and fewer buyers are going to be able to achieve financing. Thus the data is showing that real estate markets are going to be choking with properties by the end of the summer listing season. As model space is moved from late July into August, some of the high-end real estate markets will be in the mainstream propaganda media as the realtors will be screaming over failing sales and rising inventory and falling prices. As model space is progressed through 2016 and across several temporal markers, we find that credit tightens, which will cause everything from failing regional banks, failing auto dealerships, and failing real estate markets, and crashing just-in-time delivery systems to all pile onto the population, such that not only the conditions for riots but also the conditions for regional economic collapse to occur. These sets are cross-linked internally over to the real estate markets sub-set, showing that high-end properties will be both abandoned in the early stages and squatted by former owners in latter stages of the Great Real Estate Crunch 2016. Note the real crash will be in 2017. Much of the language within the bonds and real estate sections are going to the idea that a crisis condition exists now, that is basically a super huge planet-sized bubble that is going to start to pop in summer 2016. And will take over a year to actually complete the exhalation of the balloon. The data sets are showing that the size of the balloon will be debated as it is failing. The data sets are continuing growth in the hyperinflation sub-sets that will be led by the Fed as the global financial and trade markets will slide into a condition of crashing currencies. As the hyperinflation monster starts to eat its way out of the heart of the local economies, the data sets are forecasting a storm of tariffs and capital restrictions that will be traveling through economies like shit through a goose. Once again hauling model space back to the now, and then restarting it in slow forward progress, a large picture view of the financial year ahead emerges. In this year, we have the data sets forecasting the shock of the new as officialdom reaches its own cracking point wherein the financial facade is set aside to deal with reality. These sets at this larger, more national social cultural level are forecasting that governments will be getting wise and reacting to developing reality in such areas as silver and gold. In the case of the latter, the officialdom is described as going to great lengths to disparage gold during the upcoming hyperinflation. However, during that same period, the same governments will be screaming to protect their national assets of silver hoards as silver, across the globe, shifts from industrial monetary into strategic monetary industrial status. These sets are showing that surprising movements in the price will actually be so violent as to precipitate heart attacks. And the emotional sums in this area are but a small fraction of what is being carried by the longer-term values for the next 10 years. These sets are filled with language for too precious to use up, and strategic embargo on shipping silver outside of borders, and many other sets going to the idea of those who has it, wants to keep it at a national level relating to silver. The data sets are filling with examples of contradictory behavior, especially as it issues from officialdom. These sets in all entities are going to the idea of behavior in conflict with itself from local and state government to international agreements in which Section A will disagree with Section Q. These many conflicts are going to be part of the developing governmental seize-up in several nations as government reaches a peak of affordability and capacity to function. This developing trend is very pertinent to the trading community globally as a great many governments are going to become so impeded and constipated as to cause, internal to their countries, markets to misbehave. SpaceGoatFarts. The outspreading of the personal technology revolution is showing as accelerating over next few years with several announcements coming this summer, Northern Hemisphere. The data is forecasting that new refining, electrical separation of elements from aggregates, will be one of the announcements which is in a direct line to the upcoming technology, few years out, in which smart, refining, bots will slide down veins, of ore, and electrically extract, the, minerals. This first announcement is showing as being very underwhelming to the globe in general, but exciting huge interests among physicists and makers. Other sets in the SpaceGoatFarts entity with noteworthy growth include nearly every set that is related to Terra entity climate and weather. In these sets we continue to note growth in new supporting sub-set for unknown energies from space as well as identified new forms of energies from space. These latter sets include UV rays as well as electrical discharges, at a micro level at the very edge of the upper atmosphere. Other sets with large new supporting subsets include chemtrails and new glaciation. The SpaceGoatFarts entity is also suggesting that CERN is going to screw up and the Large Hadron Collider is going to go bad be sour and cause problems with local rocks. These sets are cross-linked over to the big earthquake sub-sets in ChinaPop. SpaceGoatFarts entity is also filling with longer-term values for the discussion of a pending arrival. Note that while the data sets are tending to lean toward arrival in the meaning of a traveler, there is no definition of what the traveler may be. It could be referencing a comet or asteroid. Without regard to the nature of the traveler, what is of interest here is that officialdom is being described as shitting sharp bricks over the upcoming event, as well as freaking out losing of mind over the bad circumstances within the social order. This latter is apparently due to adding complexity to a situation that is already mentally taxing to conceptualize. Conclusion: extreme and exploratory humans are odd creatures. Their minds are bifurcated and half loves regularity and the systemic approach, while the other half loves the life wild. It should not come as a surprise that humans no sooner discover a glorious example of rampaging, mind-grabbing chaos in nature, than they set out to systematize it. The example of the moment is built on human interaction with the wild rivers of the planet. Having experience in this area, my opinion is that the systematization of the experience is only meaningful when not in the experience. In other words, when in Class 6 river rapids, https://n. Desperately paddling to keep your skin sac intact, your bone box unbroken, the rating of the river is not part of the reality. It is only before the run, during the planning and the dread ahead, and afterward, in the flushing rush to the skin, and tingling to the tips of fingers and toes that tells you you are alive, that numbers about the experience can even enter your mind, let alone have meaning. As is noted in the description of Class 6 river rapids, they are by definition, runs of this classification are rarely attempted and often exemplify the extremes of difficulty, unpredictability, and danger. The consequences of errors are severe and rescue may be impossible. For teams of experts only, at favorable water levels, after close personal inspection and taking all precautions. After a Class 6 rapid has been run many times, its rating may be changed to an appropriate Class 5 to X rating. It is all about experience, and that aspect of human-materium interaction which is so captivating to the human minds that it is felt perceived as a continuous flow occupying all of the energy of the mind and body, what humans call peak experience. As may be noted, human peak experiences usually are associated with perceived potential of death at any instant and its resultant mental state of abject dynamic fear. This is what they try to achieve in amusement park rides. But in the amusement park there exists a promise is that it is all a show with no realistic chance of dying that particular ride. On the ride our planet is taking over these next 2 years, there is no such promise of safety. We are in Class 6 temporal waters. Tighten your grip on reality, it is your only paddle on this extreme and exploratory trip. Rapids dead ahead. Keep your wits about you, rescue is impossible.